buffers. So if anybody knows me or has interacted with me, you might know that stream buffers are probably my very favorite practice to protect water quality. And so we're going to talk about using forested stream buffers in our woodlands, on our farms, and how to incorporate those into our Kentucky ag water quality plans. So we're going to, I'll just get started. Talking a little bit about what stream buffers actually are. So there's lots of different names for buffers. Some folks, I typically default to riparian areas, although I'm trying to break myself of that and just say stream side buffer zones. That seems to be a little more clear to most audiences. But we also call them stream side management zones, or SMZs, in the forestry world. But they are simply a transition area between a water body and our upland land use. And so it could be a crop field, it could also be a woodland, it could be an area that where we have livestock in, or it could be even in an urban setting, it could just be a lawn or some other urban land use. So we typically have vegetation of trees, shrubs, grasses, and forbs, or those are the herbaceous plants, the plants that are non-woody. And a lot of times those are blooming. And so we like to have a variety of those plants. And I'll show you shortly what those zones might look like. But healthy stream buffers really protect our water resources. They're a great just a protector of the water body itself. And it just really does what the name says. It buffers what's going on in the adjacent landscape. So buffers can filter runoff water. Just the actual stems themselves, so the stems of the plants, can help slow water down, and then sediment will drop out of runoff. They can uptake excess nutrients. That's the NPK, or the nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, that might be getting maybe being lost from the landscape and headed toward the water body. The roots hold soil in place and help protect stream banks from erosion. We've all seen some eroded stream banks and banks where you walk up to the edge of the creek and you think, oh my gosh, if I stepped one more step and fell in, I could get injured here. And so those stream banks, it's really important to hold those in place, because when we lose that sediment or that soil, it gets into our water bodies and creates water quality problems. These buffers can reduce flood damage. Really important, they provide shade to streams and help to cool or regulate water temperature. And that helps with our wildlife habitat and our aquatic habitat there in the stream itself. And then also it can improve aesthetics. So lots and lots of benefits for stream buffers. So recently we met up with a landowner, a forested landowner, who can tell us a little bit about buffers in the landscape, and can listen to a landowner speak firsthand.
This farm was put together by my grandfather over 100 years ago, and it was a farm both for woods products and for livestock and corn produce. I have a lot of memories since age 4. My father was in the military and we traveled around, but this was home. And during the Second World War, I spent a lot of time out here as a kid.
The Coons family manages this wooded farmland located in Bullitt County in the Knobs physiographic region of Kentucky. This land is drained by Crooked Creek and is part of the Salt River Basin. A portion of the original farm was sold to create Knobs State Forest and Wildlife Management Area. The Coons family manages about 300 acres with a focus on soil conservation, water quality protection, and wildlife habitat enhancement.
Okay, the knobs are interesting geological formation. Their formation goes back to about 300 million years. 300 million years. They're composed mostly of shale. They have iron deposits with them, which made them attractive for the iron industry in early Kentucky's history. One early spring, we had 10 inches of rain in about 10 hours. These whole fields were flooded. We had to hike out over the Scout Dam here. The first time the spillway had ever flooded, and I had to hold on my dog to keep it from being swept away downstream. So it really reflects the runoff that can happen in this type of topography. And this is why it's important to keep the forest sustainable.
Riparian areas link water bodies and aquatic environments with upland land uses. Riparian areas are also called buffer zones or streamside management zones. Buffers are useful on all sizes of streams, creeks, and rivers, and even on lakes and ponds. Vegetation is typically composed of trees, shrubs, grasses, and herbaceous perennials. Stream buffers are important elements of watershed management and offer benefits such as protecting stream banks from erosion, holding soil in place, taking up nutrients in runoff water, and reducing flood damage.
I also joined the Salt River Watershed Watch, and that made me very sensitive to what was going on the farm. We also participated in the water quality form, sent the form in, and have since then been very sensitive to livestock interaction with the stream. We fenced those out of the stream, which I think contributed to the low coliform counts that we've had on the stream.
Kentucky landowners with 10 acres or more involved in farming or forestry must develop a Kentucky Agriculture Water Quality Plan to comply with state law. Developing a plan includes selecting best management practices that will be utilized on the farm to protect soil and water resources. Streamside buffer zones and restricting livestock access to streams are effective practices to include in ag water quality plans. These practices not only protect resources on the farm, but also help protect water quality downstream.
We've stopped growing crops per se, and in our fields to provide a more broad environment and ecosystem for wildlife, we've planted them with native grasses and in more recent years forbs. And I'm tremendously interested in trying to preserve the monarch butterfly, and we planted and have naturally a lot of milkweed, and that's dear to my heart. Our whole approach to these attempts is to prevent erosion and preserve the quality of the stream. And having trees grow along the side of the banks tends to stabilize them, preventing silt, which would then impair the natural biologic activities that take place within the stream, the effect on the macroinvertebrates, and the fauna that lives in the stream.
To learn more about utilizing riparian buffers to protect water quality, contact your local Cooperative Extension Service office. To learn more about developing your Kentucky Ag Water Quality Plan, contact your local county conservation district.
Kind of emphasize a few things that Dr. Koontz had mentioned in the video. And excuse me, one of those is the Kentucky Ag Water Quality Act. And that just says if we're actively farming or harvesting trees, that we need to develop a water quality plan. The water quality plan is needed for applying for state cost share and also for applying for local cost share programs. And Dr. Koontz mentioned that they completed their form and with that created a water quality plan. The different sections of the water quality plan include livestock, crops, pesticides and fertilizers, farmsteads, forestry, like we mentioned, and then streams and other waters. And what you're doing when you create a water quality plan is you're creating a set of best management practices. And one of those is in the forestry section, are streamside management zones. And so what these management zones do, we have guidance for timber harvest operations is based on the type of water body that is moving through the property. And in this diagram, the example is a perennial stream. Then your buffer, or that streamside management zone where you're going to leave some trees intact, is based on the slope of the land. Like how the width of the buffer really depends on what the slope of that adjacent land looks like. And so you can imagine that as our slope increases, the greater likelihood we are to have runoff and not have infiltration into the soil. And so the greater the slope, pretty much the wider the buffer. In some cases, you can harvest some portion of trees near the stream, but there's guidance for leaving some of those trees intact so that they can provide shading to the stream, and also to help hold soil in place and provide leaf fall so that we increase infiltration and have some of that water holding capacity for those soils on those greater slopes. And so again, those streamside management zones just protect soil and decrease erosion. They promote a higher infiltration rate. So and Dr. Coons mentioned with the slopes that they have in the Knobs region, and the same thing for our mountainous regions of Kentucky, that, the greater the slope, the more likelihood we are to have runoff. So having greater infiltration rates is really important so that we can help protect the stream that's right there, but also the streams that are on down the watershed and protect them from flooding issues. And then, of course, providing shade for streams. So this guidance is in the Ag Water Quality Act, as well as the forestry BMPs for harvest operations, for timber harvest. One thing I want to point out too that Dr. Coons mentioned is when they no longer run livestock on their farm, but they were using a BMP in the livestock section to protect the streamside buffer areas. But I want to point out that you can also use this practice not just for livestock. This picture is a buffer that is in a cropping system, and we're going to get into like how it was established. But this one has some trees and small trees and shrubs, and also some herbaceous material there to help create a buffer. And so it's applicable to forestry practices, it's applicable to livestock operations as well as cropping systems. So you can develop an ag water quality plan by visiting your local conservation district for assistance. You can also develop your own plan. There is a new web-based tool, an online tool that you can use to develop that. I'm going to show a few slides about that, but really point folks to our College of Agriculture, Food and Environment Ag Water Quality Planning website. From this site, there is a link to a user guide that kind of gives you that overview of how to use the online tool. You can get straight to the tool. There is a printable version that if you would prefer to do it on paper, you can if you can get assistance to get that printed at the Conservation District office or our extension offices, or you can just do it all online if you like. It's fairly straightforward. You just create a login, and then you go to the Ag Water Quality Planning tool. You get a form that kind of looks like this, and if you're comfortable with completing online forms, digital forms, very straightforward. You do need your farm information, so you need your FSA number and then all of your address and landowner operator information. So yes, there is a printable version if you like that instead. Overall, the goal of the Ag Water Quality Act, as well as any of these BMPs, is that we have protected stream banks, and then those stream banks and those buffer zones help protect our water quality. So keeping in mind that we all live downstream from something, and our water is going to still flow downhill and contribute to a bigger water body. And in the case of Kentucky, Our water all drains to the Mississippi River Basin, and we're part of that basin, and it ultimately drains to the Gulf of Mexico. So anything that we're putting in our water is eventually going to contribute to the quality of water that's in the Mississippi River, as well as ultimately the Gulf of Mexico. So if you can cue up our second video, we're going to listen to Dr. Kuntz talk a little bit about maintenance on stream buffers.
This is what is called a passive buffer, and it has naturally occurred over the years. So I did not actively plan it as the more formal or constructed riparian buffers are done.
Riparian buffers can be established by actively planting trees, shrubs, grasses, and perennials. This method may be more labor-intensive, but may help prevent competition from existing vegetation or unwanted plants in the seed bank. Buffers can also be established by passive management, which is allowing vegetation to come back on its own. These are often referred to as no-mow zones. Both establishment methods require long-term management. An unmanaged riparian buffer can quickly be taken over by undesirable plants such as invasive species.
We're very interested in keeping it intact and enhancing it. And to that end, as you can see, we are being invaded by vine honeysuckle. And this is typically what it does. It comes out early in the spring and stays late in the fall. And it grows on any vertical surface. And you can see behind me some of these gums are being overwhelmed by it. It's growing on the ground, and we're very dismayed by what it's done to our buffering trees that are volunteered here.
Buffer zones often consist of 3 zones of planted native species. Zone 1 includes moisture-tolerant plants, often trees, that provide shading to the stream. This shading helps regulate water temperature and keep temperatures at optimal levels for aquatic life. Zone 2 often includes shrubs that are moisture tolerant but not necessarily wetland plants. Zone 3 includes grasses and herbaceous perennials that are tolerant of moderate to dry soil conditions. In urban settings, it may not be possible to create this delineation due to space and visibility constraints, but it is a good idea to include trees, shrubs, grasses, and herbaceous plants. This variety of plant types helps create a healthy stream buffer habitat.
We tried to put the prescribed layers, having trees at the riparian, at the edge of the stream, and then bushes, and then the grasses. We planted dogwood, we planted wild plum. What happened, we have very hungry deer, and they came along and nipped the tips of these, and the plantings died. So this is why we have the situation here where we have trees, we have volunteering trees and grasses intermingled, and then our grasses that we planted in the fields. My response would be to observe early in the invasive plant process and nip it in the bud. We've ignored this and didn't realize how far it had gone.
Common invasive species in Kentucky's riparian buffers include bush and Japanese honeysuckles, winter creeper, Callery or Bradford pear, and Japanese knotweed. Mechanical or herbicide treatments may be necessary to control invasive species once they become established. Landowners should also monitor newly planted buffers for wildlife browsing. In the long term, buffers should be inspected on an annual basis to ensure plant growth and survival, and to identify any areas of concern such as invasive species, storm damage, or signs of erosion.
Overall, these attempts improve the quality of the water.
To learn more about managing riparian buffers to protect water quality, contact your local Cooperative Extension Service office.
Get our slides to advance. There we go. So establishing buffer zones, this is a question I get a lot of, okay, I want to do a buffer zone. So how do I do it? And you heard Dr. Coons in the video talking about some of the challenges with buffers. One of the first things that we want to do is determine what the width of the buffer will be. And I always say, I will take as much buffer width as you'll give me, but I also recognize that there are constraints and folks don't want to give up all of their land to a buffer. And so the thing we like to think about is with buffer width, the width is going to determine what benefits that we get from that buffer. So a minimum of 15 to 20 feet will give us some stream bank protection, but the wider the buffer, the greater the benefit that we'll get, including nutrient uptake and pesticide removal from runoff. And so I like to use this graphic, and especially the one at the bottom, those colored bars, just kind of give you an indication of the distance from the body of water. And as you increase the width of the buffer, you start picking up extra benefits. So that 10 feet is the minimum, really, and I say 15 to 20 if I can get it, but that's the minimum width of a buffer that we would need to give us some stream bank stabilization and water temperature moderation. So again, just keep in mind, the wider the buffer, the better. Other things we need to think about are planting strategy. Dr. Coons mentioned they did a passive buffer establishment, and then we saw a demonstration of someone actually planting a tree. When we do those planting strategies, we do want to control for unwanted vegetation prior to planting. That's one thing we didn't mention, is that sometimes it does require an herbicide treatment prior to planting so that we can reduce competition and give those trees an increase of survival rate in there. And if you do participate in a cost share program through NRCS, for example, they will give a prescription for steps to follow to ensure survivability of that planting. And then also with the maintenance strategy, we want to do inspections, we want to control for invasives, and as Dr. Coons mentioned, making sure that you're inspecting regularly and really identifying problems before they become really out of control. For herbaceous plantings, we might have mowing strategies that we employ. If you don't want to have woody vegetation, but you're okay to maintain a grass buffer, you can mow 1 to 2 times per year, but then we mow them in strips. So you might mow once a year, but then mow only 1/3 of that. And then you're mowing kind of in a 3-year rotation. And so that helps to provide wildlife habitat, but also give us our water quality benefit. A lot of it really comes down to what your desire is. So what is the goal for having that buffer, and what kind of tolerance do you have? The picture I'm showing you here, some folks would look at that and go, my gosh, what a weedy mess. And I just am like, yes, that's just, a buffer under development. So it just kind of depends on perception as well as what your goals are for protecting your water resources. And again, the desired function, how much time you've got, and what your resources are really are going to help determine that. You saw this graphic a couple times in the videos, and just a reminder that those are just how we delineate those zones, and always wanting to have trees up near the stream to help regulate water temperature and hold the stream banks in place. Some folks might just do a no-mow zone and keep it herbaceous. And this is an example of 1 year in a crop field setting of no mowing a stream. And so lots and lots of pollinators in there, wildflowers that attract pollinators. And I look at that and just think, my goodness, how beautiful that is. So that goes to that aesthetic benefit as well. This is a planted one, so it's one that's being very strategically planted. Dr. Coons mentioned monarch butterflies and having milkweed species there. And so having some of these specific things in place are really what we're looking for. But just keeping in mind, we have lots of benefits of healthy stream buffers, protecting the stream banks, filtering runoff, uptaking those excess nutrients, but really also a huge wildlife benefit to having our stream buffers. So with that, I'm going to finish and stop my sharing, and well, thank you so much.